Maya, a successful journalist in her early 30s, receives an elegant yet odd invitation in the mail. The invitation is to a reunion with her old college friends, people she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The event is being held at Hollow Hill, an isolated mansion deep in the woods, owned by one of the friends, Ethan, who inherited it from his estranged uncle. Maya recalls the strange way their friendships had suddenly dissolved after college. There had been a falling out, though she can't quite remember why. The invitation stirs something in her, a vague sense of unfinished business. Against her better judgment, Maya decides to attend. Her drive to Hollow Hill is ominous from the start. As she travels deeper into the countryside, the weather turns dark and stormy. She finds herself on narrow roads winding through dense, shadowy forests. Strange landmarks dot the roadside, an abandoned church, a crooked old sign pointing to nowhere, and statues that seem out of place. Each mile toward Hollow Hill feels like she's descending into another world. When she arrives at the estate, the mansion is looming and decrepit. It's much larger than she imagined and far more sinister looking. As she steps out of the car, she feels the weight of the place, like it's watching her. The air is heavy, the silence oppressive. Inside, the house is dimly lit, the grand staircase coated in dust and the furniture covered in sheets as though it hasn't been lived in for years. Maya feels a sense of foreboding, but she pushes it aside as her friends begin to greet her. Each of her friends looks older, more worn down, as if they've been carrying something heavy for years. They exchange pleasantries, but Maya can feel the unease beneath the surface, as though each of them is hiding something. The group sits down for dinner in the mansion's enormous echoing dining room. There's Ethan, who inherited the mansion, Claire, a reserved artist with a haunted look in her eyes, Jake, who used to be the life of the party but now seems withdrawn, and Sophie, once Maya's closest friend, who is now distant and cold. As they reminisce about their college days, the conversation takes an unsettling turn. They avoid talking about a particular event, one that Maya only vaguely remembers, a night when they had done something they shouldn't have. There's tension in the air, and when Maya tries to bring it up, the others quickly change the subject. Later that night, Maya begins to notice the odd behavior of the house itself. Doors creak open on their own, and shadows seem to move out of the corner of her eye. The house seems to breathe, its old wooden walls groaning under some unseen weight. When she tries to sleep, she hears faint whispers outside her door, voices that don't belong to her friends. As she drifts in and out of sleep, Maya has vivid dreams of a night in college. In the dream, she and her friends are performing some kind of ritual in a dark, damp basement. There's chanting, a circle of candles, and a feeling of dread so thick it nearly suffocates her. She wakes up gasping for air, unsure of what's real. The next morning, the tension between the friends is palpable. No one is speaking about what they're really thinking. Maya confronts Sophie, demanding to know what happened in the past. But Sophie shuts her down, saying, "Some things are better left buried." Maya's frustration grows and she becomes more suspicious of her friends. Throughout the day, the house begins to show its true nature. Maya stumbles upon hidden rooms, narrow corridors, and strange relics. Old family portraits with faces scratched out, books in an unknown language, and mirrors that seem to reflect something different from reality. At one point, Maya finds an old journal hidden behind a loose brick in the wall. The journal belonged to Ethan's uncle, and it describes the history of the mansion. Hollow Hill was built on cursed land, and Ethan's family has always had a connection to the dark forces surrounding it. The journal details rituals and sacrifices made to appease the shadows of Hollow Hill. The more Maya reads, the more she realizes that her friends aren't just here for a reunion. There's something far more sinister going on. As night falls, Maya hears screams echoing from deep within the house. She rushes to find the source, but is met with locked doors and empty hallways. Her friends deny hearing anything, but Maya knows something is wrong. She begins to piece together the truth. They are all connected to a dark pact they made that night in college, and now Hollow Hill wants them back. Maya's memories of the ritual start coming back in flashes, disturbing and fragmented. She remembers that they weren't alone that night. Something else was with them, something they had summoned. The others had wanted to forget, to bury the truth, but Hollow Hill is bringing it all back. Maya confronts Ethan, demanding answers, and he finally cracks. He tells her about the pact they made in college. One night they had experimented with an old book they found, a book of dark magic. They thought it was just a game, a way to impress each other, to flirt with danger. But the ritual worked, and they summoned something. They all swore never to speak of it again, and for years they had succeeded in forgetting. But now that they're back at Hollow Hill, the entity they summoned wants its due. Ethan explains that his uncle had been protecting the mansion, keeping the dark forces at bay, but when he died, the protections broke down. Now the entity is free again, and it's after all of them. The others try to leave the mansion, but the house won't let them. The doors are locked, the windows sealed. The mansion has become a living trap, feeding off their fear. Sophie, desperate to escape, tries to break a window, only to find herself thrown back by an invisible force. The house is alive, and it's not letting them go until it gets what it wants. The house begins to play tricks on them, warping reality. Each of them starts seeing things, visions of their worst fears, twisted versions of their pasts. Jake sees the faces of people he's wronged, contorted in agony. Claire's art comes to life, monstrous and grotesque. Sophie is haunted by the ghost of her younger brother, who died in a car accident years ago, blaming her for his death. Maya finds herself trapped in a loop, reliving the night of the ritual over and over. She watches herself light the candles, speak the incantations, and summon the entity. Each time, the memory becomes more vivid, more real, until she can't tell if it's a memory or if she's living it again. The friends turn on each other, accusing one another of causing the curse. Paranoia sets in, and they begin to fracture. Ethan, desperate to undo what they've done, suggests performing the ritual again, hoping to send the entity back to wherever it came from. But Maya knows it's too late. The entity is already here, and it's too powerful to be banished. As the house tightens its grip on them, it becomes clear that there's only one way out: a sacrifice. The entity demands one of them as payment for the pact they made. The friends argue over who it should be, with tensions boiling over into violence. Maya, realizing that there's no escaping the entity's wrath, decides to sacrifice herself. She believes that by doing so, she can save the others and put an end to the curse once and for all. She prepares herself for the ritual, but as she's about to complete it, Ethan intervenes. He reveals that it was him who started the ritual all those years ago, and it's his responsibility to finish it. Ethan performs the final sacrifice, offering himself to the entity. As he does, the mansion begins to collapse around them. The friends flee the house, narrowly escaping as it crumbles into dust. In the aftermath, Maya and the others are left traumatized but alive. They know they'll never be the same again, and that the entity is still out there, waiting for another opportunity to strike. Alex, a paranormal investigator, receives a cryptic message from an anonymous client asking him to investigate Blackwood Asylum, a notorious mental hospital abandoned for decades. Blackwood has a chilling history of patient abuse, unethical experiments, and numerous disappearances, making it one of the most haunted places in the country. The client promises Alex a large sum of money if he can survive one night inside. Despite warnings from his colleagues, Alex is intrigued by the challenge. His career has hit a standstill recently, and a high-profile investigation like Blackwood could reignite his reputation. Besides, Alex doesn't really believe in ghosts. He thinks everything can be explained rationally. On the night of the investigation, Alex arrives at Blackwood Asylum. The building is a hulking ruin, its windows broken, and its walls covered in vines. As he steps inside, the temperature drops noticeably, and the smell of decay fills the air. The asylum is pitch black, but Alex's flashlight illuminates long, empty hallways, patient rooms filled with rusting metal beds, and old medical equipment scattered across the floors. As Alex sets up his cameras and EVP recorders, he can't shake the feeling that he's being watched. The asylum's oppressive silence is broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. Then, just as he's about to begin his investigation, he hears the faint sound of laughter, soft, childlike, and coming from deeper inside the asylum. Determined to prove the haunting is a hoax, Alex follows the sound of laughter down a corridor that leads to the children's ward. This part of the asylum was where the youngest patients were kept, many of whom had been subjected to cruel and inhumane treatments. The air grows heavier as he walks, and he starts seeing things, flashes of movement at the edge of his vision, the rustling of sheets on beds long abandoned. In one of the rooms, Alex finds a disturbing sight: a collection of old, yellowed photographs showing patients strapped to gurneys, their faces contorted in fear. On the wall, written in what looks like dried blood, is a single word: play. Things begin to escalate. His equipment starts malfunctioning, his cameras cutting out, and his EVP recorders picking up disturbing whispers that seem to say his name. Then, he feels a cold hand brush against the back of his neck. Spinning around, his flashlight catches a fleeting glimpse of a small child in a hospital gown, disappearing into the darkness. Alex tries to rationalize everything he's experiencing, but as the night wears on, it becomes harder to deny that something is very wrong. He hears doors slamming in the distance, footsteps echoing through the hallways, and once, when he shines his flashlight on a reflective surface, he sees the face of a nurse staring back at him, only to turn around and find no one there. As Alex ventures deeper into the asylum, it becomes increasingly difficult to navigate. The building seems to shift, corridors looping back on themselves, doors leading to nowhere, and staircases descending into endless blackness. His map is useless, and the asylum's layout is no longer making sense. Alex starts to panic. His flashlight flickers, and the batteries in his equipment die one by one. He tries to contact his team outside, but there's no signal. He's completely alone. As the night drags on, the asylum begins to reveal more of its horrors. Alex starts seeing full-bodied apparitions: a man in a straitjacket standing in the corner of a room, a nurse pushing a gurney down the hall, and a group of children sitting in a circle, their heads down, whispering in unison. But when he approaches them, they vanish. The asylum isn't just haunted by its former patients, it's alive. The walls seem to breathe, and Alex hears the faint heartbeat of the building itself. He finds old patient records that describe horrific experiments conducted by the asylum's head doctor, Dr. Crowley, who believed he could cure insanity by pushing his patients to the brink of death and beyond. Alex stumbles upon an old hidden wing of the asylum, a section that isn't on any of the official blueprints. This wing is in even worse condition than the rest of the building, with collapsed ceilings, crumbling walls, and blood-stained floors. It's here that he finds evidence of the asylum's darkest secret. In this hidden wing, the patients weren't just mistreated, they were experimented on. Alex discovers journals written by Dr. Crowley, detailing his experiments with the supernatural. Crowley believed that by torturing his patients to the edge of madness, he could open a door to the afterlife and communicate with the dead. Many of the patients in this wing were never registered in official records. They were brought here to die, their bodies buried in the basement, their souls trapped in the asylum. As Alex reads through the journals, he feels a growing sense of dread. The air in the room grows colder and the shadows seem to lengthen. Then, he hears it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the basement. Against his better judgment, Alex decides to investigate. The basement is worse than anything he could have imagined. It's a maze of dark tunnels, lined with cages and old operating tables. The smell of decay is overwhelming. And then, he sees them. Rows of bodies, long dead, but perfectly preserved. Their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Above them, scrawled on the wall in blood, is a message: they are still here. As Alex tries to escape the basement, he's pursued by something in the dark. Something not quite human. He catches glimpses of it in the corners of his flashlight's beam. A twisted, shadowy figure, its movements jerky and unnatural. It whispers to him, calling his name, promising him the same fate as the patients if he doesn't leave. But leaving isn't an option. The asylum has sealed itself off. The doors that once led to freedom are now locked, and the windows are bricked up. The asylum doesn't want him to leave. It wants him to stay, just like the others. Desperate, Alex turns to the journals for answers. Dr. Crowley believed that the only way to escape the asylum's curse was to finish the ritual he started. The ritual involves making a sacrifice, offering a living soul to the asylum in exchange for freedom. Alex wrestles with the decision. He knows that if he doesn't perform the ritual, he'll become just another lost soul in Blackwood. But if he does, he'll be condemning an innocent person to a fate worse than death. The asylum begins to manipulate him, showing him visions of his loved ones in danger, urging him to complete the ritual. In the final hours of the night, Alex's sanity begins to unravel. He's lost track of time, and the asylum's influence is growing stronger. The apparitions are no longer just flickers of light. They're solid, tangible, and hostile. He's attacked by the spirits of the forgotten patients, their bodies twisted and broken, their faces frozen in agony. In a final confrontation with the asylum's dark power, Alex realizes that the only way to end the curse is to destroy the asylum itself. Using the information from Dr. Crowley's journals, Alex sets fire to the asylum's heart, the basement where the bodies are buried. As the flames spread, the asylum's spirits grow frantic. The building begins to collapse around him, and Alex races to escape. Just as he reaches the exit, the entity that has been stalking him throughout the night confronts him. It offers him one final deal, his soul for freedom. In a moment of desperation, Alex refuses. He escapes the burning asylum, but as he looks back, he sees the shadowy figure watching him from the flames, whispering that this isn't over. The next morning, the asylum is reduced to ashes, but Alex knows that the curse isn't truly gone. The asylum may be destroyed, but the dark power that haunted it is still out there, waiting for its next victim. In this story, we follow David, a historian researching abandoned settlements. He stumbles upon the legend of Raven's Hollow, a village that vanished from all records in the early 1800s. Intrigued by the mystery, David embarks on an expedition to find the lost village, hoping to uncover what happened to the people who once lived there. David's journey takes him deep into the mountains, where he eventually discovers the remains of Raven's Hollow. The village is eerily intact, with its houses standing but overgrown with weeds and vines. There's no sign of life, and the air feels unnaturally still. As David explores the village, he finds strange symbols carved into the walls of the buildings, symbols that seem to hum with energy. The deeper he goes, the more he feels that something is watching him, lurking just out of sight. In the center of the village, David finds a large stone altar, covered in the same strange symbols. Scattered around it are the remains of what look like ancient offerings, bones, trinkets, and broken pottery. He realizes that Raven's Hollow wasn't just a village, it was a place of dark rituals. David's initial excitement at discovering Raven's Hollow quickly turns to dread as he delves deeper into the village. Every building he enters has the same strange symbols carved into the walls, but what unsettles him the most is the eerie silence. There are no sounds of birds or insects, only the whispering of the wind through the empty streets. The place feels abandoned but inhabited at the same time. David begins documenting everything he finds: old artifacts, abandoned furniture, and the unsettling symbols. As he explores, he notices that the houses are arranged in a spiral, all leading toward the stone altar in the village center. It's clear to him that this altar was the heart of the village, but its purpose remains a mystery. Then David finds something disturbing: an old diary, half buried in one of the houses. The pages are yellowed and crumbling, but the handwriting is still legible. The entries are from the last days of the village, and they tell a chilling story. The villagers believed they were protected by an ancient spirit, something they called the Watcher. In exchange for protection, the villagers would leave offerings at the altar, but something went wrong. The offerings were no longer enough to satisfy the Watcher. The villagers began to disappear one by one, taken by the spirit to another place. Panic spread through the village as the disappearances continued, and soon no one was left. As David reads the final entry, he feels a chill run down his spine. The last line reads, "The Watcher is always watching." After reading the diary, David begins to feel uneasy. The village, once merely an interesting historical site, now feels like a trap. He decides to leave, but as he makes his way back toward the trail he came from, the forest seems different. The path he followed into Raven's Hollow is gone, replaced by dense, twisted trees that block his way. It's as if the village doesn't want him to leave. David starts hearing strange noises, a faint whispering that seems to come from the shadows around him. At first, he thinks it's just his mind playing tricks on him, but the whispers grow louder. The words are indistinct, but he can make out his name among the murmurings. Something is calling him, luring him deeper into the village. As night falls, the atmosphere changes. The air grows colder, and the once abandoned village feels alive with unseen activity. Doors creak open on their own, and David can hear footsteps echoing through the streets. Though he sees no one, the symbols on the walls seem to shift in the flickering light of his lantern. Unable to leave, David takes refuge in one of the houses, barricading the door behind him. But even indoors, he isn't safe. Shadows flit across the walls, and he feels a constant pressure, as though something is watching him from just outside his line of sight. Then, in the dead of night, he hears it. The sound of scratching at the door, slow, deliberate, and relentless. David knows he isn't alone in the village anymore. The scratching at the door stops, but David is too terrified to move. He spends the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching his lantern, waiting for something to happen. When morning finally comes, he emerges from the house, exhausted and on edge. He can't shake the feeling that something is following him. Desperate to escape, David decides to investigate the stone altar in the center of the village. He believes it holds the key to understanding the curse that haunts Raven's Hollow. As he approaches the altar, he notices that the ground around it is disturbed, as if something was recently buried there. With trembling hands, David begins to dig. He uncovers old bones, human remains, and objects that were likely used in the village's rituals: masks, candles, and a large, jagged stone. At the very bottom of the pit, he finds a small black box. Inside the box is a withered piece of parchment. The writing is faded, but David can make out enough to understand its meaning. The villagers had made a pact with the Watcher, a deal sealed in blood. But when they tried to break the pact, the Watcher exacted its revenge. As David stands over the altar, he feels the ground tremble beneath his feet. The air grows thick with a sense of malevolence, and a deep, guttural voice fills his head. "You should not have come. The Watcher has returned." David's fear turns to panic as the ground beneath him shifts, cracking open to reveal dark, writhing roots that snake toward him. He stumbles back, dropping the black box as he tries to flee, but the village has become a maze. The once familiar layout has twisted, the houses shifting position and the paths leading him in circles. As he runs, the whispers grow louder, turning into guttural growls. David catches glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees, watching him with glowing eyes. The Watcher isn't just one entity. It is many, a collective of spirits that hunger for his soul. David's body screams in exhaustion, but he pushes on, his only goal being to survive. As he rounds a corner, he sees the forest in the distance, the way out finally within reach. But between him and the forest stands a towering figure, tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burn like embers. It's the Watcher in its true form. The creature raises a bony hand and the village responds. The trees warp and twist, branches reaching for David like skeletal fingers. The ground splits open, revealing chasms of darkness. It's as though the entire village is alive, and it wants David as its next victim. In a desperate act, David remembers the jagged stone he found at the altar. He pulls it from his bag and holds it up toward the Watcher. The creature recoils slightly, its eyes narrowing, but it doesn't retreat. David realizes that the stone is a part of the ritual, but he doesn't know how to use it. David is cornered, with no clear escape. The Watcher looms over him, its presence overwhelming. In that moment, David realizes what the villagers must have felt in their final days: helpless, trapped, and at the mercy of an ancient, malevolent force. The jagged stone in his hand begins to glow, emitting a faint, eerie light. David knows that he has only one chance to survive, but it comes with a terrible cost. The stone is not just an artifact. It is a tool for the ritual, a ritual that requires a sacrifice. The diary's final entry flashes in his mind. The Watcher is always watching. The villagers had tried to break the pact by sacrificing each other, but they had failed. The only way to truly end the curse is for David to offer himself. With trembling hands, David raises the stone and places it against his chest. The light intensifies, and the Watcher lets out a deafening roar, its shadowy form writhing in agony. David feels the stone burning into his skin, searing his soul. His vision blurs as the world around him fades into darkness. In his final moments, David understands the truth. The village, the Watcher, the curse. They were all bound together by the choices of those who came before him. And now, he is part of that eternal cycle. As the light consumes him, David whispers his final words, "I am the sacrifice." The next morning, the village of Raven's Hollow is gone, swallowed by the forest. All that remains is a single black stone, lying in the dirt where the altar once stood, waiting for the next traveler to stumble upon its curse. Crimson Lake, named after the deep, blood-red hue of its waters at sunset, had long been the subject of local legends. Some said the lake was cursed, others believed it was a place where dark rituals had once been performed. But to Clara, it was simply a getaway, a quiet, secluded spot where she could escape the pressures of city life. She had rented a small cabin on the shores of the lake for a weekend retreat, planning to spend her time reading, hiking, and relaxing by the water. As Clara drove along the narrow, winding road that led to the lake, the towering trees closed in around her, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy overhead. The farther she drove, the more isolated she felt. Her phone had lost signal miles ago, and the radio picked up nothing but static. Still, Clara was excited. The idea of being completely disconnected was thrilling. When she finally arrived at the cabin, she was struck by how perfect it seemed. The small wooden structure was nestled between the trees, with a clear view of the lake. The water shimmered in the late afternoon sun, and the surrounding forest was peaceful. Clara unpacked her car and settled into the cabin, enjoying the quiet. As the sun began to set, however, something about the lake's reflection caught her eye. The water, once crystal clear, now seemed to glow with a deep, unnatural red. It wasn't just the sunset. Something beneath the surface seemed to be stirring, shifting. For a moment, Clara thought she saw a shadow moving under the water, but when she blinked, it was gone. Shrugging off the unsettling feeling, Clara decided to take a walk around the lake before it got too dark. The trail was quiet, but the silence felt different now, heavier. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows between the trees. As she rounded a bend in the path, Clara saw something strange, a small, weathered gravestone, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. She stepped closer to examine it, her curiosity piqued. The inscription was faded, but she could make out a name: Isabelle Laurent. Below the name, the words, "Taken by the lake," were carved into the stone. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Disturbed by the gravestone, Clara hurried back to the cabin as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees. The lake, now fully bathed in crimson light, seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. She tried to shake off the unsettling discovery, telling herself that the gravestone was probably just an old marker, a relic of some long-forgotten local history. Back at the cabin, Clara lit a fire and settled into an armchair with a book, determined to relax. But as the night grew darker, the cabin began to feel oppressive. The wind outside had picked up and the trees swayed, casting shifting shadows through the windows. The sound of the lake lapping against the shore seemed to grow louder, almost rhythmic, like breathing. Then, just as Clara was about to drift off to sleep, she heard it. A faint whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, more insistent. It was a voice, soft and distant, calling her name. Clara. Her heart raced. She stood up and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The lake was still, its surface reflecting the moonlight, but something felt wrong. The voice came again, this time louder. Clara. Clara backed away from the window, her hands trembling. The voice was coming from the lake. She didn't know how she knew, but she was certain of it. Something in the water was calling to her. For the rest of the night, Clara sat in the corner of the cabin, wide awake, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until they became a chorus of voices, all calling her name. By dawn, the voices had faded, but the sense of dread lingered. Clara knew she couldn't stay another night at Crimson Lake. The next morning, Clara decided to leave. She packed her things quickly, eager to be away from the lake and its strange whispers. But as she loaded her car, she noticed something odd. The path that had led her to the cabin now seemed overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years. The trees, which had seemed welcoming when she first arrived, now loomed over her, their branches tangled and twisted. Trying to ignore the creeping unease, Clara started her car and began the drive back to the main road. But as she drove, the path seemed to twist and turn in ways she didn't remember. After what felt like hours, she realized she was still circling the lake. No matter which direction she turned, the road always led her back to the same spot, directly in front of the lake, where the water now seemed even darker, almost black. Frustrated and frightened, Clara stopped the car and got out, staring at the lake in disbelief. That's when she saw them, figures standing at the water's edge. At first they looked like shadows, but as she stepped closer she realized they were people. Dozens of them standing in the shallow water, their faces pale and expressionless. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized some of them from old photographs she had seen online during her research on the lake's history. They were the missing, people who had disappeared at Crimson Lake over the years, never to be seen again. As she watched in horror, the figures slowly began to move, their eyes fixed on her. They were coming out of the water. Panic surged through Clara. She backed away, but her feet felt heavy, as if the very ground beneath her was pulling her back toward the lake. The figures moved closer, their mouths opening as they whispered her name in unison. Clara. With a scream, Clara turned and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door behind her. The whispers echoed in her ears, louder than ever, as the figures gathered outside the windows, their pale faces pressed against the glass. Inside the cabin, Clara tried to barricade the doors and windows, but the whispers kept coming, filling the room, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. She felt trapped, as if the lake itself was alive, its dark waters calling to her, pulling her in. Desperate for answers, Clara searched the cabin for anything that could explain what was happening. In the back of a dusty closet, she found an old journal. The pages were worn and brittle, but the writing was clear. It belonged to someone named Joseph Laurent, and the entries detailed a horrific history. Crimson Lake, it turned out, was cursed. Years ago, in the 1800s, the villagers who lived near the lake had performed dark rituals, offering sacrifices to the spirit of the deep, a malevolent force that dwelled beneath the waters. In exchange, the spirit granted them bountiful harvests and protection from invaders. But the villagers had become greedy, demanding more and more from the spirit without offering the necessary sacrifices. In retaliation, the spirit began to take people, dragging them into the lake, never to be seen again. The disappearances continued for generations, with each victim becoming part of the lake's curse, trapped forever beneath the water, bound to the spirit's will. As Clara read the final entry, her blood ran cold. Joseph Laurent had written about his daughter Isabelle, the same name on the gravestone Clara had found. Isabelle had been one of the last to disappear, taken by the lake when she refused to participate in the rituals. Joseph had tried to save her, but he too had fallen victim to the curse. The journal's final line was a warning. Once the lake calls your name, there is no escape. Clara's hands trembled as she closed the journal. The truth was horrifying. The lake had marked her, just as it had marked Isabelle and the others before her. She was next. The whispers outside grew louder, more frantic, and Clara knew she couldn't stay in the cabin. She had to find a way to break the curse, to free herself from the lake's grip. But how? In a desperate bid to escape, Clara remembered the grave she had found. Maybe there was something there, something that could help her. Armed with nothing but the journal and a flashlight, she made her way back to the gravestone, her heart pounding in her chest. The path was darker now, the trees pressing in on her from all sides. The lake, which had once seemed serene, now felt like a living entity, watching her every move. Clara felt its presence, its hunger. When she reached Isabelle's grave, Clara knelt down and began to dig. The earth was cold and damp, but she dug with frantic energy, her fingers raw and bleeding by the time she uncovered something. A small box buried deep beneath the gravestone. Inside the box was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. The pendant felt warm in Clara's hand, and as she held it, the whispers seemed to fade, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. Clara didn't know what the necklace meant, but she felt a strange connection to it, as if it held the key to her survival. She put it on, hoping it would protect her from the lake's curse. With the necklace around her neck, Clara made her way back to the cabin, the figures by the lake watching her silently. The whispers were still there, but they were fainter now, as if the necklace was shielding her from their influence. Inside the cabin, Clara sat down with the journal once more, searching for any mention of the necklace. Finally, she found it. Joseph had written about the pendant, describing it as a protective charm, passed down through his family. It was the only thing that could keep the spirit at bay, but it came with a price. The charm could only protect the wearer for a short time. To truly break the curse, Clara would have to return the pendant to the lake and face the spirit herself. Terrified but determined, Clara knew what she had to do. She gathered her courage and made her way back to the lake, the pendant glowing faintly against her chest. As she reached the water's edge, the figures began to move again, their voices rising in a haunting chorus. The lake itself seemed to ripple, as if something beneath the surface was waking up. With trembling hands, Clara stepped into the water, the cold seeping through her skin. The pendant grew warmer, its light brighter, as the figures closed in around her. Clara took a deep breath and whispered a prayer, then dropped the pendant into the lake. The water surged around her, pulling her under. Clara fought against the current, but it was too strong. The last thing she saw before the darkness closed in was the face of a woman, Isabel, her eyes filled with sorrow. In the sleepy town of Hollow Creek, there stood an old, decaying building on the outskirts that everyone avoided, Ashwood Asylum. It had been abandoned for over 50 years, its once grand facade now crumbling and covered in vines. Locals whispered about its dark past, a place where the most disturbed and dangerous patients were once housed. But what scared people most was not the asylum's history. It was the stories of those who had gone missing after visiting the site. Nobody dared to go near it except for one person, Jordan, a journalist who had built his career on debunking supernatural myths. For Jordan, the asylum was just another urban legend to unravel, a perfect story to prove once again that ghosts, curses, and haunted places were nothing more than fabrications. He had heard the tales of the missing, of course, but in his mind, it was all just superstition. Determined to uncover the truth, Jordan decided to spend a night in Ashwood Asylum, documenting his experiences for an article. He had done it before in countless other locations, haunted houses, cursed forests, abandoned hospitals, and had always come out with nothing more than creaking floorboards and drafty windows to explain away the so-called hauntings. This time would be no different, or so he thought. As Jordan approached the asylum just before dusk, he felt a slight chill in the air, though it was still early autumn. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, like hollow eyes staring out at him. The iron gates were rusted, barely standing, and the path leading to the entrance was overgrown with weeds. Jordan snapped a few photos, making mental notes for his article. The door to the asylum creaked open easily, as if welcoming him inside. Jordan stepped into the main hall, his flashlight sweeping across the dusty, decaying interior. Old hospital beds were overturned, medical equipment lay scattered across the floor, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. As he walked deeper into the asylum, Jordan noticed something strange. There was no sound, not the usual scurrying of rats, no wind whistling through broken windows. It was dead silent, an unnatural stillness that made his skin prickle. He shook off the feeling, telling himself it was just the atmosphere of the place getting to him. He began exploring the rooms, documenting everything on his camera. The deeper he ventured, the more unsettling the asylum became. The walls were covered in strange, childlike drawings, distorted faces, shadowy figures, and eyes. Always eyes watching. Then, just as he was about to enter another room, Jordan heard it. A soft whisper coming from behind him. Help me." Jordan froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight in the direction of the voice, but the hallway behind him was empty. He stood there for a moment, listening intently, but the whisper didn't come again. Shaking his head, Jordan continued exploring. "Old buildings make strange noises," he muttered to himself. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you." But as he moved deeper into the asylum, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every so often he thought he saw something out of the corner of his eye. A figure moving in the shadows, a face peering out from behind a door. But whenever he turned to look, there was nothing there. He made his way to the second floor, where the most disturbed patients had been kept. The doors to their cells were still intact, though the locks had long since rusted. As Jordan walked down the corridor, he felt a growing sense of unease. The walls here were covered in scratches, as if someone, or something, had tried desperately to escape. Then, he found it. Room 213. According to the asylum's records, this was where the most violent and dangerous patient had been kept. Eleanor Blackwood, a woman accused of murdering her entire family. The locals believed that Eleanor had gone mad, driven to insanity by the spirits of those she had killed. Some said she had been possessed by a dark force, while others believed she had simply been evil from the start. Jordan pushed open the door to room 213. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed and a chair, but the walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room was an old mirror, its surface cracked and grimy. As Jordan stepped closer, he felt a strange pull, as if the mirror was drawing him in. He stared at his reflection, but something wasn't right. His reflection looked different, darker. The eyes weren't his. They were filled with something cold, something malevolent. Suddenly, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." Jordan stumbled back, breaking his gaze from the mirror. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced around the room, the hairs on his arms standing on end. The voice sounded so close now, almost as if it were coming from inside the room with him. For the first time in his career, Jordan felt a genuine sense of fear. Something was wrong with this place, terribly wrong. He pulled out his phone to check the time and realized with a shock that it was nearly midnight. He had been wandering the asylum for hours, but it hadn't felt like that long. Determined to stay rational, Jordan pulled out his camera again, intending to capture more footage before calling it a night. But as he lifted the camera to his eye, he froze. There, reflected in the cracked mirror behind him, was a figure, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. Jordan spun around, but the room was empty. His breath came in short gasps as he looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there, standing behind him in the reflection, her eyes locked onto his. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice full of pain. Jordan backed away, nearly tripping over the chair in the center of the room. The woman didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, her reflection the only thing visible in the mirror. Unable to tear his eyes away, Jordan watched as the woman slowly raised her hand and pointed to the door. Her lips moved, forming words that he couldn't hear, but he knew what she was saying. "Leave." Without thinking, Jordan turned and fled the room, slamming the door behind him. His heart raced as he ran down the corridor, the whispers following him, growing louder with every step. Jordan didn't stop until he reached the first floor, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He felt like a fool, running from a reflection, from an illusion. But deep down, he knew that what he had seen wasn't just in his mind. Something was in that asylum with him, something that had been trapped for a very long time. He had to leave. He had to get out of the building before it was too late. But as he made his way toward the exit, the whispers came again. This time they weren't coming from one voice. They were coming from many. "Help us. Save us. Don't leave." The voices overlapped, growing louder and more desperate with every step Jordan took. The air grew colder, and the temperature inside the asylum plummeted. Jordan could see his breath in front of him, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the door. It wouldn't open. No matter how hard he pulled or pushed, the door wouldn't budge. Suddenly, a powerful force slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his camera skidding across the floor. The whispers became a roar, filling his ears, deafening him. The temperature dropped even further, and Jordan felt an icy hand wrap around his ankle, dragging him backward across the floor. He clawed at the ground, trying to pull himself free, but the grip was too strong. He was being pulled back into the asylum, toward the dark, toward the spirits that had been waiting for him. "No, let me go," Jordan screamed, kicking at the invisible force, but it was no use. He was being dragged back deeper into the asylum's grasp. In his struggle, Jordan managed to grab hold of a nearby support beam, pulling himself up with all his strength. The icy grip loosened, and he stumbled forward, nearly collapsing as the force withdrew. He was free, but only for a moment. His mind raced as he realized the full extent of his mistake. He had come here seeking to debunk a myth, but now he was a prisoner in a place where the line between the living and the dead had blurred beyond recognition. The spirits of Ashwood Asylum weren't myths. They were real, and they were angry. The whispers faded, but Jordan knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. He had to find a way out, or he would become one of the forgotten souls, trapped in the asylum forever. Jordan's body trembled as he leaned against the cold, damp wall of the asylum. The whispering voices had quieted, but the silence that replaced them was somehow even more terrifying. Every breath he took felt heavier, as though the air itself was pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had to think. He had to get out of this place. The front door wouldn't open, but maybe there was another way. Jordan remembered seeing an old fire escape on the second floor when he first arrived. It was rusted, barely holding together, but it might be his only chance. He had to go back up, back to where the most disturbing presence lingered. His legs felt like lead as he forced himself to move. Step by step, he climbed the winding staircase, the creak of each step echoing in the empty halls. His flashlight flickered, the beam growing dim as the batteries began to die, leaving only small pockets of light in the overwhelming darkness. The second floor was even colder than before, the air thick with a heavy, oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The walls seemed to close in around him as he walked down the corridor, every door he passed holding back the weight of unseen eyes. When Jordan reached the fire escape door, his heart sank. It was chained shut from the outside. Panic surged through him, but he quickly forced it down. He couldn't afford to lose control now. He had to find another way. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. A flicker of movement just down the hallway. Jordan's flashlight swung toward it, illuminating the end of the corridor. A figure stood there, watching him. It was the woman from the mirror, Eleanor Blackwood. Her eyes, wide and empty, locked onto Jordan's with an intensity that made his heart race. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was suffocating. The air around her seemed to warp, distorting the space as if reality itself was bending under her influence. Suddenly the whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever. "Save us! Save us!" The voices seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air around him. The asylum was alive with the cries of the forgotten. Jordan's legs buckled under the weight of the voices. He stumbled backward, his flashlight falling from his hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging him into complete darkness. He fumbled in the dark, desperate to find his way out. His breathing was ragged, his heart pounding in his ears. Every step felt like it was taking him deeper into the abyss, further away from the outside world. But just when he thought all hope was lost, he heard it. A faint, metallic creak. The fire escape door, once chained shut, had somehow unlocked. With a surge of adrenaline, Jordan raced toward the door, his hands trembling as he shoved it open. Cold, fresh air hit him like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could breathe. He scrambled onto the fire escape, the rusted metal groaning under his weight. The rickety structure swayed dangerously as he climbed down, but he didn't care. He had to get out, had to escape the asylum's grasp. As his feet touched the ground, Jordan looked up at the towering, decaying structure of Ashwood Asylum one last time. The building loomed above him, dark and silent, as if it had never held any of the horrors he had witnessed. But just as he turned to leave, a single whisper drifted through the air, carried on the wind. "Come back." Jordan didn't look back. He ran. When Emily and David bought their new home on the outskirts of town, they were thrilled. The house was a charming Victorian, with its intricate woodwork and expansive garden, perfect for their growing family. But the excitement quickly turned to unease as they began to settle in. From the moment they moved in, Emily felt a strange energy in the house. The air seemed thick, and the corners of her vision often played tricks on her, making her see fleeting shadows and hear faint whispers. David dismissed her concerns as stress from moving, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she heard the whispers again. This time, they were clearer, though still unintelligible. She tried to ignore them, attributing them to the old house settling, but sleep eluded her. The whispers grew louder, and Emily was sure she could make out a single phrase. "Help us." The whispers continued, growing more insistent with each passing night. Emily decided to investigate. She began by researching the history of the house and discovered that it had once belonged to a family who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Intrigued and disturbed, Emily delved deeper, uncovering a series of tragic events linked to the house. The family had been reported missing 20 years ago, and their disappearance remained unsolved. Emily felt a chill as she realized the house's dark past was more than just a series of old stories. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily explored the house late one night. The whispers were now a constant presence, guiding her to the basement. The basement was dank and filled with old furniture covered in dust. But one corner caught her eye, a hidden door behind a pile of old boxes. She forced the door open, revealing a small room with strange symbols carved into the walls. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest, locked and covered in cobwebs. Emily's heart raced as she approached the chest, the whispers growing louder. Emily managed to pry open the chest, revealing an assortment of old documents, photographs, and a single diary. The diary belonged to the mother of the missing family. As Emily read through the diary, she discovered disturbing entries about a malevolent presence in the house, a presence that had been growing stronger and more demanding. The entries described how the entity communicated through whispers, urging the family to help it escape its torment. The mother had written about her growing fear and desperation, realizing too late that the entity's demands were leading them to a dark fate. Emily's hands trembled as she read the final entry. "It's too late for us. Save yourself before it's too late." Terrified, Emily slammed the diary shut. The whispers seemed to be mocking her now, growing louder and more chaotic. She realized that the entity's presence was linked to the house itself, and it was determined to make her its next victim. As the days passed, Emily and David began to experience more disturbing phenomena. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and eerie figures appeared in the corners of their vision. David was finally convinced that something was wrong, but he was unsure of what to do. Emily suggested they consult a paranormal expert. The expert arrived, a seasoned investigator named Sarah, who was intrigued by the case. Sarah set up equipment throughout the house, recording the strange occurrences and analyzing the whispers. During one of the sessions, Sarah captured clear evidence of the entity's presence, a chilling, disembodied voice that repeated the phrase, "Help us." Sarah's analysis revealed that the voice was not just a random occurrence, but a direct plea from the trapped spirits. Sarah warned Emily and David that the entity was growing stronger, feeding off their fear and distress. The more they tried to resist, the more the entity would torment them. To save themselves, they would need to confront the entity and uncover its true nature. With Sarah's guidance, Emily and David prepared to confront the entity. They gathered in the basement, where the entity's presence was strongest. Sarah conducted a ritual to communicate with the trapped spirits, hoping to gain insight into their plight and find a way to free them. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the basement dropped drastically, and the whispers became a cacophony of tortured voices. Shadows twisted and writhed, taking on grotesque forms. The entity revealed itself as a dark, shadowy figure with hollow eyes, its form shifting and undulating as it moved. Emily felt a wave of terror wash over her, but she stood her ground. Sarah continued the ritual, urging the spirits to reveal the truth. The entity's true nature was exposed, a malevolent force that had been trapped in the house, feeding off the souls of those who lived there. With Sarah's help, Emily and David performed a cleansing ritual to banish the entity. It was a harrowing experience, filled with intense fear and emotional strain. The entity fought back, but the combined strength of their will and Sarah's expertise eventually overpowered it. The cleansing ritual had a profound effect. The house was finally free of the malevolent presence that had haunted it for so long. The whispers ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Emily and David felt a sense of relief and closure. But the experience had changed them. The memories of the entity's whispers and the shadowy figure would linger in their minds forever. They decided to leave the house behind, unable to shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As they moved into a new home, they made sure to leave a note for future occupants, warning them of the house's dark past. They hoped that their story would prevent others from falling victim to the same horrors they had faced. Maggie, an antique enthusiast, stumbled upon a quaint little shop during her travels. The shop was filled with dusty old relics and forgotten treasures. Among the various items, one particular piece caught her eye, a stunning ornate mirror with intricate carvings and a rich, dark frame. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with a mysterious air about her, seemed unusually eager to sell the mirror. She warned Maggie that the mirror had a dark history and that it was best to leave it alone. But Maggie, intrigued by its beauty and charm, decided to buy it anyway. That evening, as Maggie hung the mirror in her living room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The reflection seemed strangely distorted, as if the mirror was not just reflecting her surroundings but something more sinister. As the night progressed, Maggie began to notice unusual occurrences. Objects moved on their own, and shadows seemed to shift and grow in the mirror's reflection. She dismissed it as a result of the old house settling, but the unease persisted. Maggie's curiosity about the mirror grew as she continued to experience strange phenomena. She began researching its origins, delving into local history and folklore. She discovered that the mirror had once belonged to a wealthy family who had met a tragic end under mysterious circumstances. The family's daughter, Eliza, had been found dead in front of the mirror, her expression frozen in terror. The mirror had been passed down through various owners, each of whom experienced a series of disturbing and unexplained events before abandoning it. Determined to uncover the truth, Maggie decided to investigate further. She set up a camera to record any unusual activity and spent the night in front of the mirror, hoping to capture evidence of its malevolent influence. As the hours passed, Maggie's anxiety grew. She saw dark shapes moving in the reflection, and the temperature in the room dropped significantly. The mirror seemed to take on a life of its own, its surface rippling and warping as if something was trying to break through. The recordings revealed unsettling footage of the mirror's activity. Shadows moved and twisted in the reflection, and strange, indistinct shapes appeared in the glass. Maggie also noticed a pattern. The mirror seemed to be showing glimpses of a past that wasn't her own, scenes of a lavish house and a young woman in distress. Desperate for answers, Maggie sought the help of a paranormal investigator named Ethan. Ethan's analysis confirmed that the mirror was a conduit for a powerful and malevolent entity. The entity was not merely a ghost, but a dark force that thrived on fear and despair. Ethan explained that the mirror was a portal, linking the physical world to a realm of darkness. The entity had been using the mirror to reach out to those who gazed into it, feeding off their fear and growing stronger with each passing day. Maggie's fears were confirmed. The mirror was not just haunted but cursed. To rid herself of the entity's influence, she would need to perform a ritual to sever the connection between the mirror and the dark realm. With Ethan's guidance, Maggie prepared for the ritual. They gathered various protective items and performed a series of incantations to banish the entity from the mirror. The ritual was intense and emotionally draining, requiring Maggie to confront her deepest fears and darkest thoughts. As the ritual progressed, the mirror's reflection became increasingly distorted. The dark shapes and shadows seemed to come alive, swirling and writhing in the glass. The entity's presence grew stronger, manifesting as a terrifying, shadowy figure that reached out toward Maggie. Despite the fear and horror, Maggie and Ethan pressed on. The ritual was a battle of wills, with the entity fighting back against their efforts. But with perseverance and determination, they managed to complete the ritual and banish the entity from the mirror. The mirror's surface returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Maggie felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that she had finally freed herself from the mirror's curse. Even after the ritual, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror still held a trace of the entity's influence. She decided to keep the mirror covered and stored away, hoping to prevent any residual effects. However, strange things continued to happen. Maggie experienced vivid nightmares and saw fleeting shadows in the corners of her vision. It was as though the entity's presence had left an indelible mark on her. Ethan suggested that the entity's influence might linger in the mirror's aura, even after the ritual. To truly sever the connection, Maggie would need to part with the mirror and find a way to cleanse the residual energy. Reluctantly, Maggie decided to sell the mirror to a collector who specialized in haunted artifacts. She hoped that by removing it from her life, she could finally put the past behind her. Years later, Maggie learned that the mirror had found its way into a new home. The collector had sold it to a family, and soon after, reports of strange occurrences and disturbing visions began to surface. The cycle of terror seemed to continue, with the mirror's dark influence affecting its new owners. Maggie realized that the entity's curse was not easily broken, and the mirror's legacy would likely continue to haunt those who came into contact with it. Though she had moved on from her own experiences, Maggie couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for the mirror's dark legacy. She hoped that one day, someone would find a way to truly rid the world of the malevolent force trapped within the glass. Laura, an avid collector of antiques and curiosities, received a unique gift from her grandmother, an old dollhouse that had been passed down through their family for generations. The dollhouse was intricately detailed, with tiny furniture and miniature rooms that fascinated Laura. She displayed the dollhouse in her study, marveling at its craftsmanship. But as she spent more time with it, she began to notice strange things. Objects in the dollhouse seemed to move on their own, and she occasionally heard faint, ghostly whispers when she was alone in the room. Laura tried to dismiss it as her imagination, but the occurrences grew more frequent and unsettling. The dolls inside the house seemed to have a life of their own, their expressions changing and their movements becoming more erratic. Intrigued by the strange events, Laura decided to investigate the dollhouse's history. She discovered that it had once belonged to a young girl named Emily, who had lived in the house many years ago. Emily had been a lonely child, and her only companions were the dolls in her dollhouse. The more Laura learned, the more she realized that Emily's life had been filled with tragedy. The girl had died under mysterious circumstances, and the dollhouse had been passed down as a family heirloom. Laura began to suspect that the dollhouse was more than just a sentimental artifact. It might be haunted. Determined to uncover the truth, Laura set up a series of experiments to document the dollhouse's activity. She recorded the strange movements and sounds, hoping to find evidence of a supernatural presence. Laura's recordings revealed disturbing footage of the dollhouse. The dolls moved on their own, and the miniature rooms seemed to change and shift in ways that defied logic. Laura also noticed a pattern in the dolls' behavior. They seemed to mimic events from her own life. As she delved deeper, Laura discovered hidden compartments within the dollhouse, each containing small, unsettling items, tiny pieces of clothing, old photographs, and handwritten notes. The items hinted at a dark and troubled past, with references to a mysterious figure who had visited the dollhouse. Laura's investigation led her to an old diary that had been hidden in the dollhouse's attic. The diary belonged to Emily's mother, and it detailed the family's descent into madness. The entries spoke of strange occurrences and a growing sense of dread that had enveloped their lives. The more Laura learned, the more she felt a connection to Emily and her tragic story. The dollhouse seemed to be a conduit for the girl's restless spirit, and Laura felt compelled to help her find peace. Laura consulted a medium to communicate with Emily's spirit. The medium performed a seance in Laura's study, hoping to establish contact with the young girl. During the seance, the dolls in the dollhouse came to life, their movements becoming more animated and erratic. Emily's spirit appeared, a sad and forlorn figure, expressing her sorrow and confusion. She revealed that she was trapped in the dollhouse, unable to move on due to the dark presence that haunted it. With the medium's help, Laura performed a ritual to cleanse the dollhouse of its dark energy. The ritual was intense, with the dollhouse's tiny rooms becoming a battleground for the spirits. Laura and the medium fought to free Emily's spirit and banish the malevolent presence that had taken hold. After the ritual, the dollhouse seemed to return to normal. The strange movements and whispers ceased, and Emily's spirit was finally at peace. Laura felt a profound sense of relief and closure. However, Laura knew that the dollhouse's dark past would always be a part of her. She decided to keep the dollhouse as a reminder of the haunting experience, but she no longer displayed it in her study. Instead, she stored it away, hoping to preserve its history while protecting herself from its lingering effects. Years later, Laura heard rumors of strange occurrences in her old home. The dollhouse had been sold to a new owner, and reports of eerie phenomena began to surface. Laura realized that the dollhouse's legacy was far from over, and that its dark influence would continue to affect those who came into contact with it. Laura's final research revealed a shocking truth. The dollhouse was not just haunted but cursed. The dark presence that had plagued Emily's family had been bound to the dollhouse through a series of occult rituals. The rituals had created a portal between the physical world and a realm of darkness, allowing the malevolent force to influence those who came into contact with the dollhouse. Laura's efforts to cleanse the dollhouse had been only partially successful. The curse remained, albeit weakened, and the dollhouse continued to be a source of fear and unrest for its new owners. Determined to end the dollhouse's reign of terror once and for all, Laura contacted experts in occult practices and sought their help to perform a final, comprehensive cleansing. The process was arduous and required a deep understanding of the curse's origins and the rituals needed to break it. In the end, Laura's dedication paid off. The dollhouse was finally free from its curse, and Emily's spirit could rest in peace. Laura felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had played a part in ending the dollhouse's dark legacy. Tom and his friends decided to spend a weekend in a remote cabin deep in the forest. The cabin, which belonged to Tom's family, was secluded and rustic, offering the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. As they arrived at the cabin, they were immediately struck by its eerie charm. The surrounding forest was dense and dark, and the cabin seemed to have a mysterious aura. Tom's friends, Lisa and Mark, were excited about the adventure, but Tom couldn't shake a sense of unease. The first night was peaceful and they enjoyed a campfire and storytelling. But as darkness fell, Tom began to notice strange sounds coming from the forest. Faint whispers and footsteps that seemed to follow them as they moved around the cabin. Tom tried to dismiss it as the forest's natural sounds, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. He decided to investigate, venturing into the woods alone. The forest was unnaturally quiet, and Tom felt a growing sense of dread. The next morning, Tom's friends noticed that some of their supplies had gone missing. Tom mentioned his eerie experience in the forest, and his friends laughed it off as his imagination. But as the day progressed, they began to experience strange occurrences of their own. Lisa reported seeing shadowy figures moving outside the cabin, while Mark heard disembodied voices in the middle of the night. The atmosphere grew tense as the friends struggled to understand the source of the disturbances. Tom decided to investigate further, searching the cabin for any clues. He found an old journal hidden in a dusty corner of the attic. The journal belonged to a previous occupant of the cabin, and its entries detailed a series of unsettling events: disappearances, strange noises, and encounters with dark figures in the forest. The journal hinted at a dark secret buried in the cabin's history, and Tom felt a growing sense of dread. He shared his findings with his friends, and they agreed to spend the rest of the weekend trying to uncover the truth. Tom and his friends delved into the cabin's history, researching old records and talking to locals. They discovered that the cabin had once belonged to a reclusive hermit who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The hermit was rumored to have practiced dark rituals and communicated with malevolent entities from the forest. According to local legend, the cabin was built on an ancient burial ground, and the hermit's rituals had angered the spirits of the land. As Tom and his friends continued their investigation, they uncovered evidence of strange occurrences and rituals performed in the forest surrounding the cabin. The more they learned, the more they realized that the cabin was a focal point for supernatural activity. Determined to uncover the truth, Tom and his friends decided to perform their own investigation of the forest at night. They set up cameras and recording devices to capture any paranormal activity. As night fell, the forest came alive with strange noises and eerie lights. Tom and his friends followed the sounds to an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was decrepit and covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. Inside, they found remnants of old rituals, candles, symbols, and dark stains on the floor. It was clear that the cabin had been used for summoning dark forces. The group felt an overwhelming sense of fear as they realized they were not alone. Suddenly, the atmosphere grew colder, and shadowy figures emerged from the darkness. The friends were engulfed in a terrifying encounter with the malevolent entities, struggling to escape the cabin and the forest's grasp. The friends managed to escape the forest and return to the main cabin, but the experience left them shaken. They knew they had to find a way to protect themselves from the malevolent forces they had encountered. Tom and his friends sought help from experts in paranormal phenomena and occult practices. They performed a series of rituals and protections to ward off the dark entities and cleanse the cabin of its negative energy. The process was intense and required the group to confront their deepest fears. The rituals involved banishing the malevolent entities and creating protective barriers around the cabin and the forest. Despite their efforts, the experience had left a lasting impact on Tom and his friends. They decided to leave the cabin behind, knowing that the forest's dark secrets would always remain a part of their memories. Years later, Tom learned that the cabin had been abandoned and left to decay. The forest had reclaimed it, and the stories of strange occurrences and disappearances continued to circulate among locals. Tom and his friends knew that their encounter with the dark forces had left a mark on them. They had experienced firsthand the malevolent presence that haunted the cabin and the forest. Despite their attempts to cleanse and protect themselves, the cabin's dark legacy endured. Tom hoped that by sharing their story, they could warn others about the dangers of the forest and the cabin's dark history. The experience had changed them forever, and they carried the memory of their terrifying encounter with them for the rest of their lives. Emily, a journalist known for her investigative work, received an intriguing letter from an anonymous sender. The letter contained an invitation to a remote village called Elderton, which had been shrouded in mystery for decades. The sender claimed that Elderton was cursed, and that the villagers were hiding a dark secret. Intrigued by the letter, Emily decided to accept the invitation and investigate the village. She arrived in Elderton, a quaint and isolated settlement nestled deep in the mountains. The village seemed almost frozen in time, with its old-fashioned houses and narrow streets adding to its eerie charm. As Emily explored the village, she noticed that the locals were wary of outsiders. They spoke in hushed tones and avoided making eye contact. Despite their aloofness, Emily managed to find a place to stay, a small inn run by a woman named Mrs. Hawthorne. That evening, Emily sat down with Mrs. Hawthorne for dinner. She tried to gather information about the village's history, but the innkeeper was evasive and changed the subject whenever Emily brought up the village's curse. The sense of unease grew stronger as Emily realized that the villagers were hiding something. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily ventured out into the village after dark. The streets were eerily quiet, with only the distant howl of the wind breaking the silence. She wandered through the village, noting the old decrepit buildings and abandoned houses. As she walked, Emily began to hear faint whispers and strange noises coming from the shadows. She felt as though she was being watched, and the oppressive atmosphere made her skin crawl. Despite her fear, she pressed on, hoping to find clues about the village's dark secret. Emily stumbled upon an old cemetery at the edge of the village. The gravestones were weathered and covered in moss, and the area was overgrown with weeds. As she examined the graves, she noticed that many of them were marked with unusual symbols and inscriptions. Among the graves, Emily found a partially buried journal. The journal belonged to a former resident of Elderton and contained disturbing entries about the village's history. The writer described strange rituals and disappearances that had plagued the village for years. Emily's investigation led her to the village library, a dusty and neglected building filled with old records and documents. She searched through the archives, hoping to find more information about Elderton's past. The records revealed that the village had been founded in the 17th century by a group of settlers seeking to escape persecution. However, their new home was far from peaceful. The settlers had encountered mysterious phenomena and disturbing events, leading to a series of tragic incidents and unexplained disappearances. One document mentioned a secret society known as the Order of the Eclipse, which had been established to protect the village from an ancient curse. The society had performed dark rituals to appease a malevolent entity that was said to dwell in the surrounding mountains. Emily realized that the village's curse was deeply rooted in its history. The Order of the Eclipse had been responsible for keeping the entity at bay, but their efforts had only partially succeeded. The malevolent force still lingered, influencing the village and its inhabitants. As Emily delved deeper into the village's history, she learned that the curse was tied to an ancient ritual that had gone wrong. The ritual was meant to bind the malevolent entity and prevent it from causing harm, but it had inadvertently unleashed its dark power. Determined to stop the curse and help the villagers, Emily sought out the remnants of the Order of the Eclipse. She discovered that a few elderly villagers were still practicing members of the secret society, and they had been conducting rituals to contain the entity's influence. Emily approached the elders and pleaded for their assistance. The elders were initially reluctant to help, fearing that revealing their secrets would make things worse. However, Emily's persistence and the evidence she had gathered convinced them to cooperate. The elders agreed to perform a new ritual to strengthen the binding of the entity and remove its influence from the village. Emily was invited to participate in the ritual, which would be held at the site of the original ceremony. The night of the ritual arrived, and Emily joined the elders at the ancient ceremonial site. The location was a clearing in the forest, surrounded by ancient stone pillars and covered in strange symbols. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of dread. As the ritual began, the elders chanted ancient incantations and performed complex gestures. The air grew colder and the ground trembled as the malevolent entity responded to their efforts. Emily felt a powerful, oppressive force trying to break through the ritual's protections. The entity manifested as a shadowy figure, its form shifting and writhing in the darkness. It was a terrifying sight, with eyes glowing like embers, and a voice that echoed with malevolent intent. The figure seemed to taunt and challenge the elders, trying to disrupt the ritual. Emily and the elders fought to maintain their focus and complete the ritual. It was a battle of wills, with the entity's dark power clashing against the ritual's protective magic. The struggle was intense and exhausting, pushing everyone to their limits. As the ritual reached its climax, the malevolent entity's power began to wane. The binding magic took hold, and the shadowy figure was forced back into the mountains. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the village seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The villagers emerged from their homes, their expressions a mix of fear and hope. The curse that had plagued Elderton for so long had finally been contained, and the village could begin to heal. Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment and relief. She had faced the darkness head-on and helped the villagers break free from the curse that had haunted them for generations. The village of Elderton would never be the same, but it had a chance to rebuild and move forward. As Emily prepared to leave Elderton, she reflected on her experience. The village's dark legacy had been a challenge, but she had overcome it with courage and determination. She hoped that the story of Elderton would serve as a reminder of the power of resilience and the importance of confronting the darkness within.